My name is Evelyn Mercer, and at 67, I had mastered the art of staying quiet. Years of keeping numbers straight as a school accountant had trained me to file emotions neatly. Grief in one drawer, disappointment in another, but no drawer in my mind could hold what happened that afternoon in Savannah. The air was thick, that kind of coastal humidity that makes the wallpaper sigh. I'd spent the morning polishing silverware, thinking about Graham's wedding, my only son. They'd said the date wasn't fixed yet, so I decided to call. Just a simple question. Mother to son. The phone rang twice before a voice I hadn't expected answered. Lydia's. Her tone was sugar over steel. Evelyn. Hi. You're calling about the wedding, aren't you? I smiled, relieved. Yes, dear. I wanted to know when it'll be. I need to plan my travel, maybe pick up that lavender dress from the tailor. She cut in, almost laughing. Oh, that was yesterday. For a moment I thought she'd misspoken. Yesterday. Yes, she said. Crisp and cheerful. We only invited special people. I didn't drop the phone, but the world seemed to tilt anyway. The hum of the ceiling fan roared like a storm. I heard myself murmur something congratulations. Maybe, but my voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. When the call ended, I stood in the living room of my own house, phone in hand, listening to a silence so complete it seemed alive. Across the room, the sofa I'd bought for them last spring looked smug in the lamplight. In the hallway, a lavender dress hung waiting for a day that had already passed. I sat down, hands trembling, and opened my purse. The $1,000 check I'd written for their wedding gift was still there, neatly folded. My pen hovered above it. Slowly, I tore it in half. The paper split cleanly. One quiet sound in a house full of echoes. That night, I wrote a single line in my journal yesterday. They buried the mother without a funeral. Outside, thunder rolled off the river. I closed the book and stared into the dark, the silence pressing close like a stranger who finally knew my name. Morning came slow, as if the sun itself was reluctant to face me. I brewed coffee I barely tasted and set the cup beside my old checkbook. The thunder from last night still lingered somewhere over the river. A low growl that felt personal. I opened a fresh page and wrote a title at the top. Neat and centered. 3 years, Graham and Lydia. The pen felt heavier than it should have. Rent $500 a month for 36 months, $18,000. Furniture sofa. Dining table. Curtains for the apartment they couldn't afford, $400. Groceries. Just for a few weeks until they settle, $600. Medical bills. Lydia's tooth surgery I covered temporarily, $200. Birthday gifts. Christmas envelopes. Emergency car repair, honeymoon loan, $5,800. The total stared back at me, $31,000. Every number felt like a small betrayal mine, not theirs. Each check I'd written was meant to buy love's stability, to keep the ground from shifting under my son's life. But somewhere along the way, I had purchased my own disappearance. The window beside me rattled with wind. A few magnolia petals stuck to the glass, trembling before falling away. I remembered the day Graham handed me my first thank you note. He was 9, and it was written in blue crayon. He'd spelled mother as motor. I'd kept that paper for years. Folded neatly in the same desk drawer where last month's bank statements now lived. I found it there. Edges yellowed. The handwriting was shaky but sincere. You make everything okay. I pressed it flat against the table and felt something inside me ache, not the soft ache of longing, but the hard one that comes after you finally understand the truth. Love had become an invoice, and I had been too proud to ask for payment that wasn't in gratitude. Outside, rain began again, slow and deliberate. I let it fall without closing the window. The air smelled clean, almost forgiving. I picked up my pen once more and drew a single line under the total, then closed the book for good. A week passed. The rain eased, leaving the sidewalks in Savannah slick and shining like old coins. I'd stopped counting days. They no longer owed me meaning. I cleaned the same teacup every morning, watched the same stretch of river shimmer beyond the trees, and tried not to look at the phone sitting on the kitchen counter. When it finally rang, I already knew who it was. The name Lydia glowed on the screen, small and sharp. For a moment, I almost let it ring out of existence. Then, something colder than anger made me swipe to answer. Renate. Oh, thank God you picked up. Her voice came out in short gasps. The way people sound when they're running toward something they've already lost. The rent's overdue. Did you forget to make the transfer? I looked out the window. The magnolias were wilting now, petals turning brown around the edges. I waited long enough for the silence to stretch between us, the kind that forces truth to show its face. No, I said finally. My voice was steady, too steady. I didn't forget. I remembered everything, especially what you said. She hesitated, confusion bleeding into irritation. What I said, I let the pause hang, long enough for her to hear her own cruelty echo back. Then I spoke softly, almost kindly. Didn't I tell you I only help special people? There was a tiny click in her breath, a sound like a door closing. The air between us froze, for the first time in 3 years. Lydia had nothing to say. I waited one heartbeat, then another, and ended the call. My hand trembled slightly as I set the phone down. Not from fear, from something else entirely, something lighter. The house was silent again, but it was a different kind of silence now. Not the hollow one that follows abandonment, but the clean, unfamiliar quiet of a woman who has finally stopped apologizing for existing. The next morning, I dressed with the quiet precision of someone heading to war. I wore my gray wool coat, the one Graham had once said made me look too old-fashioned, and took the bus downtown. The ride was slow, the city still waking, the air heavy with salt from the river. The familiar streets of Savannah blurred past iron balconies, oak trees heavy with moss, the same facades I'd stared at for 40 years. But today, they felt different, as if they belonged to a place where I was finally just a woman, not someone's mother or provider. Inside the bank, the air smelled of paper and disinfectant. I waited in line behind a man arguing about a business loan, his impatience filling the marble room. When it was my turn, I stepped forward and smiled at the teller. I need to see Mr. Klein, I said. He appeared a moment later, taller than I remembered, his hair now almost entirely silver. Mrs. Mercer, he greeted warmly. It's been too long. We sat across from each other at his glass desk, sunlight filtering through the blinds in sharp, golden lines. I handed him a neatly folded list of accounts. I'd like to cancel all automatic transfers from my checking account to Graham Mercer and Lydia Mercer, effective immediately. Mr. Klein blinked, then adjusted his glasses. All of them. You've had these standing orders for 3 years. Yes, I said. 3 years too many. He hesitated, as if measuring how much truth he was allowed to speak. After all these years, are you sure, Mrs. Mercer? I met his eyes. I'm done paying rent on my own neglect. He nodded quietly and began typing. The soft clack of his keyboard felt like a hymn. When the final confirmation slip printed, I signed it in one clean stroke. Outside, the winter light was sharp but gentle. The city smelled faintly of coffee and possibility. As I stepped onto the sidewalk, the wind lifted my hair, and for the first time in years, the sunlight didn't feel like something I had to earn. It just touched me, freely. When I turned onto my street that afternoon, I noticed a car I didn't recognize parked by the curb. Then another. My stomach tightened before my mind caught up. The blinds in my front window were half open, just enough to show movement inside. I had locked that door myself this morning. The key trembled slightly between my fingers as I slid it into the lock. It didn't turn. Someone had left it unlocked. I pushed the door open and stepped into my own living room as if crossing into foreign territory. Graham sat on the sofa, elbows on his knees, head bowed like a child called to the principal's office. Lydia stood behind him, arms folded, her expression painted calm but stretched too thin. A third man, in a gray suit with polished shoes, was flipping through a folder on my dining table. "Mom," Graham said, standing quickly. We were worried. You haven't been answering calls." The man looked up and smiled with professional ease. "Mrs. Mercer, I'm Mr. Fisher. Your family reached out to me to assist with some legal clarifications, just a temporary guardianship arrangement to protect your finances." The words fell like cold water down my back. "Guardianship," repeated slowly. "For whom?" "For you," Lydia said softly, stepping forward. "Please don't take this the wrong way. We just think you might be struggling, forgetting things. You've been acting unusual." Mr. Fisher finished for her. I walked to the table, took the folder from his hands, and opened it. Neat paragraphs, signatures, lines. My name spelled perfectly. I closed it again, without breaking eye contact. I dropped the papers into the metal trash bin by the desk. "The only thing declining," I said, "is my patience." The silence that followed was sharp enough to draw blood. Graham's shoulders sank. Lydia's confident smile flickered, then vanished. I moved toward the door and held it open. "If you came to visit, you've done it. If you came to rescue me, you're late by about 30 years. They didn't move at first. Then Graham stood, eyes down. As they stepped outside, I turned the deadbolt behind them. The lock clicked, a clean, satisfying sound that no longer needed anyone else's key. The morning after they tried to take my life on paper, I woke before dawn. The air was still, the kind that comes before a storm or a decision. I brewed coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and dialed the number written on a small card I'd found years ago in a community newsletter. Weber and Associates, Elder Financial Protection. I had kept it out of habit, never imagining I would need it. "Mr. Weber answered himself. His voice was low and deliberate, the voice of someone who had seen too many betrayals wrapped in family photos. I told him everything from the secret wedding to the intrusion. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, there was a pause long enough for me to hear my own breathing. "Mrs. Mercer," he said finally, "what they did was more than disrespectful. It was unlawful. I'll take your case, but first we protect you. Change the locks. Document everything. And don't speak to them without me." By mid-morning, a locksmith arrived. He was young, polite, with work-roughened hands. The sound of metal turning inside the old door made me strangely emotional, like hearing a new heartbeat in an old body. He replaced every lock, even the one on the back gate, then handed me a small envelope with 3 new brass keys. "Only you have these now," he said. I nodded, pocketing them as though they were proof of existence. That afternoon, Mr. Weber came by. We sat in the same living room where Graham and Lydia had confronted me. He placed a legal pad between us. "Let's start with what you've given them," he said. I opened my folder and began listing each payment: rent, furniture, emergencies, gifts. Line after line of devotion disguised as duty. He nodded slowly, writing notes, his pen scratching like the sound of someone sealing a door. When he left, I filled out a single check, the first in months. The ink glided steady across the paper "pay" to the order of myself. The signature below looked like a woman I was just beginning to meet. A week passed in uneasy calm. I'd begun to sleep with my phone beside the bed, not for comfort, but readiness. The house felt different now, safer. Yes, but watchful, as if the walls themselves were waiting for the next intrusion. It came on a Thursday afternoon, 3 soft knocks, polite and practiced. When I opened the door, a woman stood on my porch, mid-40s, neatly dressed, holding a brown folder pressed to her chest. Her smile was gentle, her voice official. "Mrs. Mercer, I'm from Adult Protective Services. We've received a concern about your well-being." The words dropped like stones. My pulse quickened. But I forced my expression steady. "From whom I can't disclose that," she said, stepping forward slightly. "We've been told you've shown changes in behavior, that you may be isolating yourself and mishandling finances. I just need a few minutes of your time." Behind her rehearsed sympathy, I heard Lydia's voice, every phrase borrowed from her vocabulary of control. I took a single step back and reached for the phone on the entry table. "I'll be happy to speak once my attorney is present," I said, dialing. Mr. Weber arrived within 20 minutes, his briefcase under one arm, his calm a shield in itself. He greeted the woman with quiet authority. "I represent Mrs. Mercer. Before you continue, may I see your credentials?" She complied, though the color had drained from her confidence. Mr. Weber opened his folder and placed documents on the table: bank statements, medical evaluations, notarized records of my mental and physical health. "Mrs. Mercer is of sound mind and managing her affairs responsibly," he said. "I trust this resolves the concern." The social worker glanced through the papers, her professional tone softening into apology. "It appears there's been a misunderstanding." When she finally left, I followed her to the porch. Her car rolled down the street, slow and embarrassed, until it vanished around the corner. I stood there long after she was gone, my heartbeat loud in my ears, relief tangled with a fury I didn't bother to hide. By Saturday morning, the air felt charged, thick with something inevitable. I had just finished watering the garden when I heard tires crunch over the gravel. 2 cars, again one dark blue, one silver. I didn't need to see the license plates to know. They were already halfway up the porch before I could turn the key in the lock. Graham's face looked older, harder. Lydia followed close behind, clutching a stack of papers like weapons. "Mom, please," Graham began, his voice brittle. "We just need to talk. I didn't invite them in." The threshold felt sacred now, a thin line between my peace and their chaos. Lydia's tone was soft but venomous. "You don't have to be like this. We were only trying to help you. Everyone thinks you're losing control." I met her gaze. "You don't help people by taking their names off their own lives." Her smile broke. Graham stepped forward. "Do you really want this to be how we end things? You'll die alone, Mom. Is that what you want?" Something in his words hit deeper than anger. It struck the ache I'd carried since his first breath, the fear of being forgotten. But I stood my ground. "If I die alone, it'll be because I chose truth over lies, and I can live with that." Lydia's voice cracked. "We were counting on you, Renate. We built our lives around your support. You can't just cut us off." I felt the heat rise in my chest, but my reply came cold and measured. "Then build new lives, ones that don't depend on someone else's savings or silence." The argument spilled onto the porch. A curtain shifted next door. Mrs. Collins, pretending not to stare. For once, I didn't care who saw. Graham's face twisted, a flicker of shame behind the fury. "You'll regret this," he said, turning toward the steps. Lydia followed, shoulders tight, her anger trailing behind her like perfume. When their cars finally disappeared down the street, I closed the door. My hand lingered on the lock as I leaned against the wood, breath trembling. The house was quiet again, too quiet, but this time, the silence belonged to me. The next morning, I woke to the smell of wet earth. Rain had passed in the night, leaving the air clean and heavy with magnolia. I made coffee, sat at the table, and stared at the 2 empty chairs across from me. The silence was different now, no longer tense, just vast. A knock came, gentle but certain. When I opened the door, Mrs. Eleanor Brooks from next door stood there, holding a thermos and 2 chipped mugs. I had seen her dozens of times in passing, tending to her roses or waving from her porch, but we'd never exchanged more than polite greetings. "I heard voices yesterday," she said carefully. "Didn't want to intrude, but I figured today might call for company." I almost refused, then caught the kind steadiness in her eyes and stepped aside. "Come in," I said. We sat in the living room, and she poured coffee for both of us. The warmth of the mug seeped into my hands before I even took a sip. "I went through something similar," Eleanor said after a pause. "My daughter once called love a favor, said if I really cared, I'd keep paying her bills. I thought if I stopped, I'd lose her. Turns out I'd already lost her long before that." Her words landed softly but precisely. I nodded, staring at the rising steam between us. I kept thinking I'd done something wrong. I admitted that maybe if I'd given less advice or more money or just stayed quiet, "You could have been perfect," she interrupted gently. "And it still wouldn't have been enough for people who only see love as income for the first time in months." I laughed, a dry, uncertain sound, but real. We talked for hours about motherhood, mistakes, the quiet ache of being needed only for what you give. When she finally left, the house no longer felt empty. It felt lived in again, warmed by the kind of care that didn't cost anything but time. Spring came early that year. The azaleas bloomed in a rush of color, spilling over the sidewalks like a secret no one could keep. I watched them from the porch one last time before the moving truck pulled away from the curb. The house stood empty behind me, its rooms stripped of everything except light and the faint smell of coffee that had seeped into the wood over the years. I had sold it quietly, without fanfare or goodbye visits. Half of what I earned went straight to the Georgia Council for Elder Rights. Mr. Weber handled the paperwork, proud but restrained, as if he knew that dignity thrives best in silence. "You've done something rare," he said. "You've turned loss into protection." The rest I kept, enough to begin again. My new apartment overlooked Forsyth Park, a smaller space, but it suited me. I filled the shelves with secondhand books and planted jasmine along the balcony rail. Its scent drifted in each evening as the city lights flickered awake. For the first time in years, I slept through the night without waiting for the phone to ring. Eleanor visited often, carrying fresh bread or the latest gossip from our old street. We would sit outside, watching people walk their dogs or children chase each other beneath the trees. Sometimes we spoke. Sometimes we didn't need to. The quiet itself had become a friend. On the small desk near the window, I began to write. At first, just notes, memories, fragments, lessons I hadn't realized I'd learned. The pages filled faster than I expected. When I finally gave it a name, I smiled at the irony. Special people. The story wasn't about Graham or Lydia anymore. It was about the woman who had finally stopped mistaking sacrifice for love. I used to think being special meant being chosen. Now I know it means choosing myself.